Experiment is dangerous, judgment is difficult, and it's not enough for the physician to do what is necessary, but the patient and attendants must do their part as well, and circumstances must be favorable. You know who wrote that?
Well, I didn't know the gentleman, but it sounds a lot like Hippocrates.
Very good. Listen, emergency medicine's come a long way from the days when a part-time resident would be the entire staff in a busy city hospital, hasn't it?
It's tremendous, the changes that have taken place. We don't like to say this too often, but there was a time in my medical lifetime when you were safer in the ambulance on the way to the hospital than you were when you arrived in what was then an emergency room. The system was to send the interns down there and let them do whatever they needed to do to practice their craft and hope that they didn't do any harm. But in the early 60s, people began to realize that that wasn't good enough, that people who came to the emergency rooms were the most critically ill of all the patients we saw.
Oh, sure.
And that it was time that real doctors practiced down there. And so between 1962 roughly and 1970, there was a gradual development of people becoming more and more interested in emergency medicine. We started here in emergency medicine in 1969 at the medical center, and in fact Delaware had only the 5th chapter of the American College of Emergency Physicians. We were in it that early.
What, is it a specialty organization now? I mean, it's not connected with the hospital per se, is it?
Well, here in Delaware, here at the medical center, no, we're not. We are a private corporation that contracts with the medical center to staff their emergency service and essentially provide doctors to work in their emergency department.
What did I say in the introduction? I said something wrong.
No, you said I was president of the Medical Society of Delaware. Actually, I was president-elect, but shortly before I took office, I had to step down because of a lot of illnesses in my family. Well, so I can't take too much credit there.
You were founder and president and consultant of so many things. Forgive me.
Perfectly.
Are you full-blooded Irish?
100%. Where'd
you get that name?
Corballis, believe it or not, is an old Irish name formed of the 2 Irish words cor and baile. Baile meaning town and cor meaning strangers.
Okay.
And baile translates into Bally, B-A-L-L-Y, and then Y and I-S are interchangeable, so it eventually became Corballis.
Okay, what are the, tell me about the emergency services at the medical center.
Well, the Medical Center of Delaware, as you probably know, is one of the largest private medical centers in the country. And we have, strangely enough for a small state in Delaware, an enormous emergency service. We see over 93,000 patients a year in our emergency services, both at a mixture of Wilmington and Christiana. So it's a tremendous service, and it varies very much from the common cold to someone who's had a cardiac arrest or a terrible auto accident.
Well, they're the 2 that's the most common, both of them.
Those are the 2 biggies that we do, if you will.
Sure.
And we have to be ready at all times for any patient who would come in with his heart stopped or having been terribly injured in an auto accident. When seconds count, Dr. Cowley from the shock trauma unit in Baltimore invented the term the golden hour of trauma. If you can get the patient stabilized within the first hour, the odds are you're going to save them. If you can't, the odds are you're not going to save them. And so it's critically important that all the resources be there and be ready to be applied to the patient.
I know people often wonder why it has to cost so much. I know it is awful expensive.
Yes, it is. It's no question. It costs so much because here in America, people want care now. They come to the emergency department for things that in other countries they wouldn't consider coming to the emergency department. And I'm not criticizing, that's just the American system. The other problem is that we have so many poor and uninsured people in the country. Here in Delaware particularly, for instance, in our service, we collect 50 cents for every dollar that we bill. Now, it is very, very difficult to do that without charging the people who can pay more than they normally would have to pay for those who can't, because neither the federal nor the state government make up for that difference.
So if somebody, say, has a a heart problem, you know, has pains in their chest, and they don't have any hospitalization plan of any kind, and they rush them into your emergency room, you will still treat them.
There is never a question.
Nobody's ever turned away.
It doesn't have to be a heart attack. It can be a head cold. Our rule is that if the person walks in the door and up to the desk,
for a head cold?
yes, sir, every day, by the dozen, and we toothaches and things like that. And
but they know there's no cure for a head cold.
That's right. Well, they don't want a cure. We don't cure a whole lot of diseases. You must understand.
Sure.
But if you have, suppose you had this program tonight,
right,
and you were coughing, and your throat was sore, and your nose was stuffed up. Wouldn't you like somebody to give you medicine to make it so that you sounded better on the television?
No, I'd play a tape and go home and go to bed.
Well, but I don't see any reason why people can't come in for symptomatic relief.
Yeah.
But it is expensive. That's the problem.
Well, when is it appropriate to go to the emergency department? I mean,
when you think you have an emergency. That's the only answer I have.
Life-threatening?
No.
No?
No. If you think you've got a problem that we can help, come in, we'll take care of it.
How do I get hold of an ambulance just like that?
Call 911.
They'll send it.
Yes, sir. The Delaware was the first state to have statewide 911 ambulance telephone system, thanks to Mary Journlin, our county executive. She was the politician who pushed that through. And that gives you instant access to either a volunteer ambulance if you have a relatively minor problem, or to the paramedics if you have a serious problem.
What is the difference between volunteer ambulance attendees and the paramedics?
Well, a volunteer ambulance attendant is trained in what we call basic life support. And that's a course nationally registered of 110 hours. And that gives them the fundamentals of recognizing a fracture and how to splint it, or someone with chest pain is really sick, and things like that. A paramedic is trained for over 1,200 hours. And they are basically a physician's assistant. They do many of the things doctors do, but they do it in a very narrow range.
I see.
For instance, they can do an electrocardiogram and read it. Mm-hmm. They know what that reading means in the sense of it needs X drug, Y drug, or whatever. But they can't tell you very much about what's going on in the person's heart. That's what doctors really do and know.
Well, what about the state police trooper medics? I've heard of those.
Very excellent service for the people in Delaware. What we did was to get a helicopter service in Delaware, was to train a group of state police as paramedics. They're trained to the full 1,200-hour level. When you see the state police helicopter flying, and you look up, you see a vehicle that has in it 2 police officers. Mm-hmm. One is a pilot, and the other is a paramedic. They're doing police work. If they're needed for a medical call, they break off and come down and do the medical call, and then go back to being policemen. And because of that, their service is at no charge to the community, which is a tremendous benefit. Because if you were to take a commercial helicopter system, it's $2,000 just for it to lift off the ground. And then the meter starts running after that.
Wow.
So it's an enormous benefit to the citizens.
Why does it seem to take so long when you're in the emergency room to have a doctor come along? I know I was in one recently and it seemed like I lay there forever.
It is a serious problem. If you take in the city of Wilmington, think for a minute how many doctors practice in Wilmington. How many doctors have offices? There's not a lot. So lots and lots of people come and see us in the emergency department. And that means that the ones, unless you have a very serious illness, you have to wait. At Christiana, we have a different problem. When we built that hospital in 1985, believe it or not, we thought that we would eventually have 35,000 ER visits a year. We passed that on the 3rd day open. And
third day?
The 3rd day.
Oh my gosh.
And we now have over 55,000 visits. And our problem there is we just don't have enough rooms to put people in.
Yeah.
And it gets clogged up and backed up. Plus the fact that nationally, there's a terrible shortage of intensive care nurses. So no one has enough intensive care beds. So that if we get a cardiac who needs an intensive care bed, they may have to wait with us for 6 or 8 hours. While they're in that room, nobody else can go in that room. So it becomes a very, very serious, which is why we're going to build a new facility at Christiana that eventually will be large enough to service 68,000 visits a year. It'll be one of the larger units on the East Coast.
Can they go to emergency room in any of the other hospitals like the Wilmington?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Wilmington has an emergency department. Christiana, Riverside has an emergency department, and St. Francis has an emergency department.
That's good to know, because I know it always seems like I see them coming down I-95 heading for Christiana, and I'm thinking, why don't they go in the city?
Aha, that's a very good point. All trauma must go to Christiana because it's the trauma center, and all heart disease should go there because that's where we have the most facilities.
We're going to take a break, Doctor, and see if we can pay a few bills with these words.
Makes good sense.
We'll be right back. Welcome back. I want to start the contest that we always have every week. You must be 18 years old now to participate. You can't have won before. You can only call once any one evening. And I'm going to ask you a question concerning the topic that has already been discussed. In what nation did Dr. Corballis receive his medical education? So as soon as you think you have the right answer, start calling. Okay, now let's get to some of these questions, Doctor, that people have been calling in like mad. Here's one from Sean of Newark. Did I hear you correctly? Did you say the emergency room treated 35,000 cases the first 3 days it was open?
No, I'm sorry if I gave you that impression. What I meant to say was that annualized, we exceeded 35,000 the first day open. That would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 160 patients a day.
Okay. Does Delaware have a trauma center? How are they rated, and where does our trauma center stand in the rating? And Don of Newcastle wants to know.
Well, yes, we do have a trauma center. We are the only level 1 trauma center between Baltimore and Philadelphia. There is only one rating. It's not like you're an A, B, C, or D. If you're a level 1, you're a level 1. And we actually have an excellent program. We see over 1,200 real traumas a year. And the trauma team response is very good, and the results have been excellent.
Okay, let me see. Here's one from Bill of Ellesmere. I'm interested in becoming an emergency medical technician. Where do I start to look for training?
If you want to be a basic emergency medical technician, you go to the Delaware State Fire School, which is in Dover, and you can just call them and talk to them, because there are courses that are given in Newcastle County. St. Francis sometimes has the course, the medical center gives it sometimes. If you want to be a paramedic, you contact the Newcastle County Police. It's actually the police, but you ask for the ambulance division, and they'll give you all the information.
Joan of Wilmington, I think we've answered this, but I'll read it to you anyhow. Do medical schools have a separate specialty to teach emergency medicine?
No, they don't. In fact, in most medical schools, emergency medicine is not a department. It's usually a section of surgery. That's because professors don't like to give up turf. and emergency medicine takes turf from everyone. But no, they do not. Once you've finished your medical school, then you come into a residency, as we have one at the Medical Center of Delaware, and you go through 3 years of training to become an emergency medicine specialist. At the present time, we have 30 residents in emergency medicine at the Medical Center.
Okay, Nancy of Wilmington wants to know, I often wondered if an ambulance can legally go up a one-way street or through traffic lights or speed through a school zone. I don't think they legally can do that, can they?
No, they cannot.
Well, I guess she's seen them do it.
Well, I didn't say they didn't do it. It's very good now. It really is. Years and years ago, it was awful. Yeah. And in fact, there is an area, and I don't want to mention where it is in Delaware, that has not had ambulance service for many years because trees kept running out on the road in front of the ambulances on their way to the hospital. And they eventually gave that up. That's one of the reasons the county started their ambulance division.
Dr. Ben, here's another Ben of Newark. If a patient who is in need of a painkiller, would you give it to them in the emergency room not knowing if they were allergic to it? I guess if they didn't know what they were allergic to. I guess that's kind of hard to tell. You have to give them something. Every
patient is, and I can tell you this specifically for our organization, every patient is carefully questioned as to drug allergies. If they are allergic to a drug, or if there's any suspicion that they're allergic to it, we use a different drug.
Okay. If I was in the emergency room, how could I be sure, not knowing the doctor, that I'd be getting quality care?
That's the most difficult thing there is for a patient to know. Most patients think of quality as how quickly it was done, and did the doctor smile, and was he nice to me? And that isn't what quality is all about. What the patient really has to do is rely on our system, which does very, very careful quality review. We check charts. For instance, to give you an idea, we review every x-ray read by every emergency physician for, say, 3 months, and we score them by comparing them to the subsequent consultative reading by the radiologist. And we see, is our ER doctor really reading them as well as he should? And so we work very hard at that. I don't know how a patient can if I were in a hospital in another state.
Doctor?
Oh, absolutely.
You can call.
Oh, absolutely.
If they'll get there in time.
Well, if they don't get there in time, we'll take care of you till they get there.
Yeah.
But we are very, very strongly in favor of everybody having their own doctor. And if you want your doctor called, your doctor will be called.
Okay. There's a lot of talk in Washington about national health care. I guess like socialized medicine, it's in Canada and England. Do you think that would work here? Because there's an awful lot of people, doctor, can't afford it.
Exactly. I don't think it'll work here, because the American people are not used to the idea that they can't have what they want right now. In Ireland, when I was a medical student, fractures were only set 2 days a week. Here, fractures are set within an hour of arrival at the emergency department, or 2 hours.
So under socialized medicine, you have to wait.
Unfortunately, rationing is a real part of it, and rationing means waiting.
Oh, I didn't know
it
that.
means being put off. If you're 55 in England, you can't have dialysis because you're too fragile. That means they don't want to spend the money. There are big problems with it, but our system isn't perfect, and it needs a great deal of work. And I don't know what we're going to have to do to revise it, but
Well, certainly something has to be done.
without question, because the burden on the poor is too much, and on the middle class, it's horrendous.
Yeah. Okay, I don't think we have. Let's try this real fast. If a trauma happens in Wilmington, why bypass a Wilmington hospital to go to Christiana? Can you give me
Because the
an answer on that?
facilities and the trauma surgeons and everything you need to have your life saved is at Christiana, and it's best to go there.
Doctor, I want to thank you for coming on Access Delaware. We're going to have to take a break, and I'll be right back to wrap things up right after these words. Last week, Carmen Yancey of Bear, Delaware won the contest, and this week, Nancy, do we have a winner?
We have a winner.
We have a winner just coming in. You're going to receive a beautiful elegant entree dinner for two at the Christiana Inn and Bistro on King Street, and they are a nice place. You'll be dining at an all-suite hotel with a state-of-the-art fitness center staffed with professional trainers, and a dining room that extends out to the open atrium where you can enjoy a delicious meal featuring a variety of eclectic American cuisine and heart-healthy specialties. It's a great place, 707 King Street. And the winner is Henry Kozicki, if I'm saying that right, in Wilmington, Delaware. And you'll be receiving your tickets from the Christiana Inn and Bistro. And I hope you enjoy it. Next week, Ann Morgan of Growing Younger, the matchmaking service, will be here for Valentine's Week. And the 2 weeks following her, I'm going to have on 5 best-selling authors, one on philosophy, another on religion, a couple on romance. So I think you'll really enjoy that. Okay, as the date comes closer, I'll get more information. Well, let's just skip that because we're running out of time. I want you to remember to pray for our troops over in the Persian Gulf, because it's the most powerful weapon we have here. And I just want to say, I'm Joe Pfister telling you, get rid of that stress. Be happy, and I'll see you next week.